All right, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel. Sorry about that. This is an educational channel, and we try to check out great theories of everything, all-encompassing theories, grand unified theories, magnum opuses, tour de forces, and earth-shattering discoveries. And this is probably an earth-shattering discoveries category, Bible Decode number 230, and that is a series of decodes that we've done from the New Testament that follow the general trajectory of the Roman origins hypothesis. That is, that the New Testament was written by the Romans, the Caesars of the Flavian dynasty, that is Emperor Titus, Emperor Vespasian, and his two sons, Emperors Titus and Domitian, from 69 until 96 AD. They wrote the story of the Gospels and backdated it by 40 plus years. And they wrote the stories of Jesus because it was part of a psychological operation that they had going on against the Jews. The Romans had just got done fighting a 7-year-long war with the Jews called War of the Jews, in which Titus and his father Vespasian were both generals and both wounded in the war. And that war was a culmination of over 100 years of constant revolt, insurrection, revolt, revolution, uprising, and riot, and assassination, terrorism from the Jews. And a lot of that had to do with a lot of the Jewish idiosyncratic religion, believing there are separate, a chosen people, and having all kinds of, somewhat arbitrary rituals that they had to perform, at least arbitrary according to the Romans. And, the Romans pulled into Judea in 63 BC, and, as trying to govern the Jews, it was super high maintenance, super difficult for them to do that, more so than any other nation that they governed. And so finally, once and for all, Titus and Vespasian decided to write a story of a Jewish Messiah, not like the Messiah that the Jews were waiting for, which was predicted or prophesied in the Old Testament, one that would help them rise up and kick out the Romans or whatever colonial power, but instead a Jewish Messiah who was a Prince of Peace and who believed in rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's and walking an extra mile carrying the Roman soldier's pack, or turning the other cheek to oppression, exhorting God to forgive the Romans, while never asking to forgive the Jews, who he blamed for a lot of different things, especially in that episode where he overturns the tables of the Jewish money changers outside the temple, trying to change out the filthy Roman money with graven images all over it for the kosher Jewish money, so that it can be used for sacrificial purposes, and berating the Jews who were selling small animals for the sacrifice in the temple. These are major parts of the Jewish strictures, all of the various rituals that they needed to perform, and Jesus is taking direct aim at those. while at the same time being totally deferential to the Romans. And then when you read on in the New Testament and you get into the Pauline material, and also the book of Acts, you see that Paul is even more pro-Roman than Jesus was, and that he is even more anti-Jew than Jesus was. So almost as if they were written by the Romans. Some more red flags are that the Gospels are written in Greek, which was one of the two major languages of Rome. Not so much in Judea. They would have been speaking in Aramaic, and had they known how to write, they would have been writing in Aramaic. Very few in Judea, other than the highest upper crust, had Greek. Also, the Romans were really the only people who could have even done it, given that they had a monopoly on censorship, on distribution, and on publishing within the empire. Nobody was writing anything unless it was being approved of by Caesar. And the Romans had a very clear motive to mellow out or tame or to domesticate the Jews, to kind of get them to blend in a little more to the empire. Also, Titus really wanted the Jews to worship him. And so he did that through kind of a trick, which also allowed Titus to be grafted on to the lineage of the Jewish patriarchs going all the way back to Adam. Now they did this, the way they did this was by writing the Gospels, backdating it 40 years, and at the same time writing a history of this war between the Jews and the Romans, called War of the Jews, 66 to 73 AD. And, Titus and Vespasian were pretty much the protagonists of the story. And the story was written by a Roman insider to the Flavian dynasty named Flavius Josephus, or Josephus. And this book is in 7 volumes. And if you take a look at the War of the Jews side by side with the Gospels, you will see that they are written by the same people at the same time for the same reason. There are too many parallels between the two to ignore. You can ignore the first 5. You might be able to ignore the next 20. But after a few hundred, it gets a little bit difficult to deny that there are that they were written together to be read together, and that's how you're supposed to decode the whole script. The Romans were way into this stuff. They loved word games, enigmas, puzzles, codes and ciphers, and wordplay. And they also loved mockery and ridicule, and it's all in there. Once you, find the key, which is War of the Jews by Josephus. Michael Menescatz went into the book of Luke looking for parallels. He found over 250 of them just in the book of Luke. Which only has 1,151 verses. So 1 out of every 4.6 verses, that's the ratio. And some of the parallels go on for several verses, meaning Luke is totally saturated with parallels. The book of Luke in your Bible is only like 17 pages long or something like that. It's got 250 parallels. And many of those parallels are detailed and well hidden, well constructed, almost genius level stuff, some of them. Devastating in their, their biting and brutal humor. Clearly made with intention, not coincidence. And not only that, but he graphed the 250 on a chart, putting the book of Luke on the vertical axis and War of the Jews on the horizontal axis. Plotting all 250 plus points, he created 5 almost perfect letters in Latin, which is the other language of the Roman royal family. They mostly were bilingual in Latin and Greek. APTVS, Titus Vespasian for the T and the V. I'm not sure about the A, the P, and the S exactly, but the point is that the Romans literally put their initials on the book of Luke. And Joseph Atwill, in his 2005 book, Caesar's Messiah, looks at the ministry of Jesus in Judea and finds that it is nothing but a replica of the military campaign of Titus in Judea. Every place that Titus goes, Jesus also goes. And they go to these places in the same order. And wherever they go, they encounter parallel events to one another. And those events are spaced out by 40 years, sometimes to the hour. And we're not just talking about a few events. We're talking about over 40 separate events in the same order. Also, many of the prophecies that Jesus makes in the New Testament are fulfilled literally in the pages of War of the Jews. Especially the part where Jesus predicts the destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem. That is fulfilled by General Titus. And Jesus says that the destruction of the temple will be marking his second coming, making Titus the second coming of Jesus, and allowing the Romans to graft themselves onto the lineage of the Jews going back to Adam. There's a lot more evidence than that. I've covered a lot of it in the previous 200 videos or so. What we're looking at today is a book from Thies Voskuilen and Rosemary Sheldon that is called Operation Messiah. And this book kind of stops short of the Roman origins hypothesis to their detriment. But they do recognize the Roman origins that are involved, but they don't see the scope. They see the scope as being much more narrow than it was, meaning that they recognize that Paul, there's some red flags going on with Paul, but they don't really apply those same red flags to the Gospels, to Jesus. So the thesis here is basically that Paul is an intelligence agent of the Romans. He is a spy for the Romans. And his conversion or calling on the road to Damascus was a false flag to show that Paul is now converted. So now he's going to try to infiltrate the church, or the proto-church, the Nazarene group of James, the brother of Jesus, and Peter, Simon Peter. Okay, we're about to start a section here that is called Paul Addresses the Mob. That's in Acts 21:37 through 22:21. The next sequence of events reported in Acts is troublesome. Paul supposedly spoke to them in Aramaic. The commander ordered Paul to be taken into the barracks. He directed that he be flogged and questioned in order to find out why the people were shouting at him like this. As they stretched him out to flog him, Paul said to the centurion standing there, "Is it legal for you to flog a Roman citizen who hasn't even been found guilty?" When the centurion heard this, he went to the commander and reported it. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "This man is a Roman citizen." The commander went to Paul and asked, "Tell me, are you a Roman citizen?" "Yes, I am," he answered. Then the commander said, "I had to pay a big price for my citizenship." Paul replied, "But I was born a citizen." Those who were about to question him withdrew immediately. The commander himself was alarmed when he realized that he had put Paul, a Roman citizen, in chains. Is it believable that a man like Paul, suspected of being an insurrectionist, would be allowed by the Roman police to harangue the crowd from the steps of the police barracks? Very good question. You know, the prisoner doesn't usually give a speech to a crowd. Just saying. It seems unusual that a dissident who has just been arrested and would normally be afraid for his life, or at least for severe punishment, suddenly has the presence of mind to address a crowd. This is simply an opportunity by the author of Acts to insert an edifying speech into the mouth of an admired historical figure, following the example of other Greek and Latin authors. That is true. A lot of the ancient literature has kind of these gratuitous speeches that are, that the author could have never seen the speech, but they make it up. And that is kind of a theme that goes throughout a lot of the ancient, histories. Since the author of Acts was not a witness of the speech, his verbatim report can be categorized as historical fiction. He re-emphasizes Paul's Jewishness and introduces the idea of Paul as a Jew born in Tarsus. Acts claims this quietened the crowd. His version, of course, assumes that the crowd does not already know who Paul is. There is another way of interpreting the actions of the Roman officers. Did the Roman police arrive on the scene simply because a hubbub arose, as in the account given by Acts, or had Paul previously arranged that they should be sent for in case of trouble? Was he being shadowed? For Paul, as we shall discover, was not quite alone in Jerusalem. He had Trophimus, his Gentile supporter from Ephesus, and we also know that his nephew was in Jerusalem and was active in helping him out of difficulties. Was the nephew a civilian? Paul may have had a backup plan, and one of his supporters simply alerted the Roman authorities. It is also possible that the Romans were monitoring the events from the very beginning. Paul, ever the good intelligence man, always had his own contacts among whatever hostile group he was targeting. Paul, now confined in the barracks and supposedly flogged, asks a centurion to take his young nephew to the tribune. Some have noticed that on the basis of the imperative in Acts 23:17, Paul could snap his fingers and centurions did his bidding. Paul does not identify his nephew, which may indicate that he was already known to the Romans. He simply intimates that this is a lad who has something to tell the tribune. Such secrecy reveals that the information was of a highly sensitive nature and that Paul did not trust the centurion or any other person in the Antonia fortress, apart from his nephew, to convey it. The tribune's behavior betrays the same concern. He takes the nephew aside and interviews him out of earshot of other military personnel. He sternly cautions him not to speak to anyone. The proclamation of Roman citizenship has an immediate effect on the proceedings. The centurion makes arrangements to convey Paul to Caesarea. Perhaps what Paul did was reveal his true identity and calling. This would have put him in extreme danger in Jerusalem if word got out. The tribune's actions suggest that the centurion was concerned that his prisoner's security should not be compromised, either from without the fortress or from within. The description of Paul's part of the author of Paul's good treatment. The description of Paul's good treatment is often attributed to a pro-Roman stand on the part of the author of Acts, but it could also be that they recognize one of their own. The centurion standing by in Acts 22:25 is interpreted by some as a casual bystander and by others as the senior Roman officer commanded to supervise and formally audit the inquiry. His response to Paul's sudden 11th hour citizenship disclosure shows an awareness of the potentially devastating consequences that might befall his superior. By interrupting the proceedings, he puts his superior, Lysias, in his debt. Paul's custodial circumstances change quite remarkably once he discloses his Roman citizenship. Now he reminds them he is a citizen and that beating and binding a Roman citizen is forbidden. Acts tries to create an atmosphere suggesting that the Romans are in the dark about Paul's identity, his citizenship, and his theology. According to Acts, lightened custody is the measure of the tribune's embarrassment and fear at being utterly compromised. One scholar argued that relations between Paul and his jailers became peaceful and idyllic. This is nonsense. Paul's life may have been saved by the tribune's actions, but it was because he was saved by the Roman authorities rather than the temple police. He could find safety in the Roman legal process. Had the temple police arrested him, he might have been at the mercy of the hardliners in the Nazarene party. Paul had no intention of leaving Roman jurisdiction, and he would fight any attempt of the Sanhedrin to save him or to have him extradited. Support for this probability comes from the letter later sent by the commandant Claudius Lysias, reporting on the affair to Governor Felix, in which he says, quote, "This man was seized by the Jews and was on the point of being murdered when I intervened with the troops and removed him because I discovered that he was a Roman citizen." That's in Acts 23:27. Why would the Roman governor care? This was, after all, a minor street incident. Paul was not claiming to be the Messiah, nor was he leading any popular movement. Why save an unknown Roman from a street riot unless he had connections high up or was an important Roman asset? There is a discrepancy in Acts that suggests the order of events may have been different. The commandant reports that he was informed of Paul's Roman citizenship before he intervened. Unless Paul and his status were already known to the commandant, Lysias probably would not have intervened at all. The Romans were not so conscientious in their duties as police in an occupied province to be much concerned about whether some Jew was killed or beaten in a religious squabble. The author of Acts, however, does not wish to give such an impression of conscious planning by Paul. He thus postponed Paul's revelation of his Roman citizenship until he was about to be lashed. But then the author forgets to alter the commandant's letter accordingly. Now, that's the kind of thing that when you read it, that's a trigger or a marker that there's some decoding that needs to be done. I truly believe, just looking at all of the parallels that the Romans put into the New Testament, that they really didn't make many, if any, mistakes, and that everything is there for a reason. And usually, when there is something there that appears to be there for no reason, it's because it is got a code in it, a coded language in it. And it's a place that you look for a parallel, or you look for a clue or a riddle or a joke or something. But I haven't examined that particular verse. It looks like it's in Acts 23 somewhere. Okay. According to Acts, Paul had only once before invoked his Roman citizenship when in trouble. This was during his second missionary journey at Philippi in Greece, when Paul and his companion Silas had incurred the wrath of certain Gentile idolaters. They were denounced to the magistrates, who ordered them to be beaten in Acts 16:19. On that occasion, both Paul and Silas claimed to be Roman citizens, but strangely enough, they said nothing until after they had been beaten. So that's another place that you look for some type of coded message there. One may also wonder how they were able to prove their citizenship even after the beating. Many have doubted the historicity of this episode, especially as it seems incredible that not only Paul, but also Silas turned out to be Roman citizens. It seems as though the author of Acts has inserted the claim to Roman citizenship as an afterthought in the story, with the effect that Paul and Silas were not only released from prison, but were able to reduce the magistrates to fear and trembling. The story of Paul's declaration of his Roman citizenship in Jerusalem later on was too good not to be used again when writing about in an earlier context. Now, keep in mind that most scholars believe that the book of Acts was written by Luke. Whoever Luke was, whoever wrote the book of Luke, wrote the book of Acts as kind of a sequel to the book of Luke. Now, the Roman origins hypothesis, for example, Joseph Atwill says that the book of Acts was probably written by Domitian, Titus's younger brother, who was kind of basically jealous of Titus. And Titus died Vespasian died in 79 AD. Titus took over, but then he died 2 years later, and then Domitian took over and ruled for 15 years. A lot of the stuff in the book of Acts has to do with like the formation of the Trinity. So, Vespasian is the father, Titus is the son, and Domitian is the Holy Spirit, or Agion Pneuma with a silent P. So that is the APTVS. Some people believe the AP would be Arius Piso, who was kind of a shadow player from a very powerful family who was kind of behind the scenes of the Flavian dynasty, and whose father was originally involved in drafting probably the book of Mark, or Marcus, because the Romans had been planning on writing these Gospels for a long time. And this elder Piso, I believe his name was Lucius, presented the idea, along with Seneca the Younger, presented the idea to Emperor Nero, and he rejected the idea. And so they tried to assassinate Nero, and they got caught, and Nero executed both of them. I believe both of them. Definitely executed Seneca the Younger in 65 AD. Seneca the Younger had been Nero's tutor when Nero was younger. But then eventually Vespasian took control of the throne after three successive. Nero was assassinated, and then three more emperors were assassinated in a 12-month period. And then Vespasian took over, and they were able to convince Vespasian to do Arius Piso was able to convince Vespasian to do the Gospels. Now that's the story, really, that Roman Piso, who claims to be a distant descendant of Arius Piso, tells in his pretty voluminous writings. He's got maybe like almost 200 articles, some of which are like book length, on academia, I think it is. Okay. On the other hand, well, let's see how we're doing. I guess we only have about a minute here. So I guess we're going to stop there. Well, let's try to get this done here. On the other hand, if we take the claim at face value that Paul is a Roman citizen who travels in the company of other Roman citizens, how odd then Paul is a Roman citizen? How odd that Paul never invoked his Roman citizenship on other occasions when he claimed he was flogged. According to a statement in 2 Corinthians 11:25, he was beaten with rods 3 times and apparently did not protest on these occasions that the punishment was illegal. Nor does Paul mention anywhere in his letters that he was a Roman citizen, though such a credential might have been expected. Paul was just another prisoner until he announced his citizenship. The explanation that he was willing to suffer for Christ will not stand. If this were the case, then why did he protect himself by announcing his citizenship at this later stage? Okay, that is the end of that section. The next section is called the so-called Third Jerusalem Conference. And we'll get into